Welcome back. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. You know my next guest. Surely you do. It's the woman who started her own venture capital fund. I guess that doesn't really narrow it down. There have been a few of those. There's been Mary Meeker, Trey Vasallo, Aileen Lee, Kirsten Green, and a few more. No, this podcast is not with any of them. This is the woman who started two venture funds, a biotech one and a blockchain one. You know her, right? You, the careful student of Silicon Valley, the woman who started the two venture funds. Well, one more clue, I guess. In addition to the two venture funds, she started a wealth management company. Well, and before that, there was the real estate firm that did several $100 million in deals. But that was when she was 20. It was a long time ago. She's nearly 30 now. You know her, right? Surely you do. The first Latina ever to start a Silicon Valley venture fund? You must. But if you don't know my next guest, let me introduce you to Ba Minuzzi.
5, 4, 3, 2.
All right, welcome back. This is the Something Ventured podcast. I'm Ken Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Ba Minuzzi. How are you doing?
I'm great. Thank you for having me. It's so exciting.
It's so good to have you here. So Ba has created a venture capital fund, a couple of funds. You have one called Ausum, you have one called Babel, and you've just started a third fund, or third financial
venture,
institution.
yes. Uh-huh.
How does this happen? Like, how did you start? Like, and find your way to San Francisco? Usually it's not a very interesting story. It's usually somebody, went to Stanford, and then after Stanford, they worked at Goldman Sachs, and then they ended up in their 40s at a venture capital firm.
Yeah, I definitely didn't follow that path. I wish, but no, it was not that standard, I would say. And, well, I'm from Brazil, so I was born and raised in Brazil, and I was working... Wow, I've been an entrepreneur my entire life, very entrepreneurial since I was 15. Started my first business in fashion, and then when I was 17, did fashion business and fashion design on my degree, and then was already with clothing brand and manufacturing and so on. And
how did
when
that
I was
happen? Like, what were your parents doing that you thought that you could be like? Were they entrepreneurs themselves? Or
No, they're doctors, so both of them. Wow. Yeah, and so are my siblings. So I was always like the black sheep. They would call me pink sheep because with fashion. So they're like, oh my God, Ba is so weird.
That's very clever.
But that's how it started. I was always like seeing them at the clinic, like as doctors, and I started volunteering at the hospital when I was 13.
Wow.
And just by being at the hospital, I was working pretty much only like with kids that had cancer. And that's when I realized after 2 years of volunteer work that I couldn't be a doctor. I was like, oh, I don't like this. Like when I lose someone, I really suffer. And they were more cold in that sense. Like they were used to that. Yeah. So that's when I made my first realization. And then I started trying to find my thing, but I was super young. I think like all entrepreneurs, they start young, right? And then they just felt like I was really, really awkward. Like, oh, why she's like this? Why she's thinking about business? Like she's only 15, she thinks about money. And they thought it was about money. But I think when you're young, of course, you want to achieve something, and money is a easy way to measure that. So I started those business, and like first was at their waiting room at the clinic, so they had this space, and my father was always late for his consultation. So I was like, Dad, what if I open a store at your waiting room? And he was like, what do you mean? And I was like, clothes. Like I can sell clothes, I can sell medicine, I can sell cosmetics. And he's like, sure, like do your thing. And then I started selling, and that's how I
and people were buying the clothes from the kid. What kind of clothes were you selling?
So I would go to São Paulo, which is like a big city in Brazil, and buy from just the stores that sell to multi-brands, and then would get, like, they need to buy it. Like, you need to have a EIN. So, like, first thing, you need to have a company. So that was the first step of becoming an entrepreneur. Yeah. I couldn't just go to São Paulo, buy clothes if I didn't have a company. So I had to open a company, became an entrepreneur. And then with that, I started buying, and then I would buy. And my parents, I'll never forget, they borrowed me, like, they gave me a loan of 4K, which 4K reais is like $1,000. And then that was like the money they gave me to get started, and was for my entire life. So lucky them.
Make the most
it work. And I did.
Don't screw up.
So every time that I would make money from that, I would just make more and never ask money again. So, but I don't want to stay like in fashion, but that's how I started.
Right.
And
so the fashion business does obviously not what you're doing today. So something.
So what happened was when I was 17, I was living in Rio. When I was studying fashion already, I had to move. I was originally from Porto Alegre, like my hometown, south of Brazil. So when I moved to Rio, I was just working and selling a lot, and that's when I started understanding like capital. Like I was selling and just receiving money 30, 60, 90, 120 days after. And I was like, oh my God, I'm selling all these clothes. I'm killing it pretty much, but I don't have any capital. And of course I wouldn't ask for my parents. Yeah. So I had to ask to the bank. Right. And with those type of interest, which goes like 9, 13% a month, in Brazil, it's just like, oh my God, I was never going to achieve break-even or profitability. Did you think maybe you
should then start a bank because it's 9 and 30%?
Almost. I was like, how these companies work. So I was studying like LVMH, PPR, like how these groups really operate. Yeah. And most of the fashion designers, they like at my age at the time, they didn't care. Like, why are you studying economy and business? Like if you're talking about fashion design, I was like, okay, there's something there.
And you were learning how working capital works.
Yes.
Which is kind of funny because if you start a company in Silicon Valley, you don't necessarily learn that. Because you have this big pool of capital. Nobody expects you to do anything for a while.
Yes.
But when you have your own business and then
you really know, especially in a developing country. Yeah, you get to learn. And which still scares me sometimes here. Like when you see these founders that have so little knowledge about money and about the power of capital and how you can structure different finance and so on. It's just weird for me, but it was great way of learning just by doing. So did that, but then I almost, let's say, bankrupt because I was selling and not making any real money and getting exhausted. So at 20, I already had migraines. I had a lot of, I was always stressed, burned out. I didn't know what was that, but I was always just so anxious and couldn't talk to anyone. I would talk to my parents. I had no idea what I was going through. So I was like, okay,
and you
maybe
had
I should.
No partner at this time.
No partner, all by myself. Yeah. Tough. So I decided to close the business, and some of these sharks, like the guys from the financial world, they were just had their eyes wide open to me, like, hey, why don't you come work with us? And I was like, what do you mean? Like, you work with stocks? Yeah. Like, no. Like, you use suits? Like, no, I'm not going that way. They're like, oh, just come and work with us and you'll see. And then with that, I always knew the mom of my best friend. She was a real estate developer. And Brazil was booming because of World Cup was announced, Olympic Games. And then when I talked to her, just asking advice, finally found a mentor. She was, why don't you join me instead of joining these guys and start raising for my projects? And I was like, oh, which projects? And she had low-income houses for the first time in Brazil, because before we would have favelas, right? And then finally we had a way of financing the real estate. So I learned through her, ended up joining the guys anyway, and we structured together a startup and that was the first time someone showed me a valuation that didn't make any sense to me, because I worked so hard for the fashion business, and then suddenly these guys, I was 21 at the time already, and they were 40, and they were showing hey, look, we're building this company, it's worth 5 million reais, and you can get an equity. And I was like, how come it's worth 5 million? You have nothing. And they're like, no, it is because we have the potential. I was like, no, you're all nuts. And I got back home, I was living back in Porto Alegre, and told my parents, guys, you'll not believe, these guys just offered me this piece of equity in their company, and it seems like I have 500K now, so I'm rich. Yeah. And my parents, they were laughing. They're like, no, that's a lie. And I was like, fuck.
That's pretty funny.
So, but I ended up accepting, became a partner, became a great fundraiser at the time. I would do very small equity pieces of 50K, 100K. Yeah. Until I would raise at least 1 million, and then I would get commission plus equity, right?
Oh, yeah, right.
Yeah, so I learned that, I loved, and I became really good because I really understood low-income houses. Because of the fashion business, I used to have a lot of people from favelas working with me, so I always understood the demand. Right. And I never believed in things that you cannot talk to the client, Right. So I would go to these places and talk to the real clients, which my partners, the financial, the they were like investors, like real investors, like they would never go to those places, you know. And then I would, and I really understood. So I would talk to these other investors that would invest through me and explain so clearly why it was a great opportunity. And I'm like, wow, that makes a lot of sense,
Right.
you know, just, and it did. Like we got like 2% type of interest per month. So it was a great thing to do. Did that for a few years. Then 2013, I started in 2009 with that. So 2013, the market was slowing down, and I could feel. So at least I got very good on trusting my gut feeling and seeing like trends before they really happened. So like the low-income houses I saw way before everyone was doing.
Right.
Even like SPVs in Brazil was a new thing. So like to structure these things with these guys was something I studied. And then I said like, hey, we can do SPVs. And then for the SPVs, we can bring the investors just for a certain amount of time. And then we leave and we liquidate. So I was always super alert. I was never dumb, let's put it that way. But just by curiosity, you know. And then I felt that Brazil was slowing down, and I was like, okay, what if I go to Miami? It seems like all my clients want to buy Miami now. So I bought a condo. I bought my first condo when I was 23, I guess, in Miami. And then I had to leverage. So I opened a bank account in a private banking. I understood that as a foreign investor, I needed to have an offshore and an onshore and the whole structure to make that a good tax structure for me. And then with that, again, I learned by doing and very close. And because that money was so important for me, I couldn't lose at all. So the clients would know again. So I was like, hey guys, why don't we buy a few condos in Miami? And they were super wealthy. So like, yeah, sure. How do you do that? And then by going detail for detail, they're like, okay, let's buy. So I would do club deals in Miami, buy like 10 units at a time. And then ended up moving to Miami. Then I had a company called Invest House, which was this investment boutique. So I moved to Miami, bought another condo for myself, started doing a few real estate developments. Then there was a few Brazilians that were still doing okay after the crisis, and they really wanted to raise. So like, oh, if you have access to capital, we would love to have you on board. So I started bringing money again, co-managing with them. And then the checks were big because I started doing like 50K, remember? And then suddenly we were doing like 50 million, $100 million. It was like, wow, this is huge. And the responsibility started becoming like bigger, but I always loved, you know? And it was a very sexist industry. So I also loved like the challenge of showing them that I could do it. But after a while, I was like, okay, this is not enough. And that's when like the whole venture capital thing started.
So your multi-$100 million real estate fund is not enough. You're like, I need to do something different.
It's money. And money by itself, it's never enough, you know?
So you're in Miami. So you're getting closer to Silicon Valley, but we're not there yet. So did you immigrate at that point? Like
I got like a student visa, which was, I think, the worst time of my life. People ask about Miami, I say, oh, I didn't like. But I think it was just like the whole situation of being like studying 5 hours a day, English classes that you do not speak English. Everyone is a Spanish speaker in Miami. So you go to the class, everyone is speaking Spanish. Like, fuck, I want to learn English and everyone's speaking Spanish with me. And you need to stay there, otherwise you don't have the visa. So, and you work, because I was learning a lot about private equity, real estate, structures. So you were hustling, and at the same time you're studying, and then I was super lonely in Miami because I was always driven, and there's not a lot of driven people in Miami. Seriously. It's at least I didn't find them. If they are there, I was not lucky enough. So I would feel very lonely. Like if I wanted to read a book during the weekends, people would get upset. Like, oh, why don't you want to go on a boat? I was like, oh, because I don't care about boats, you know? So it was super lonely that time. Like San Francisco felt home since my first visit here.
Really?
And yes, really home.
Why did you visit here the first time?
So I was about to do my first angel investment, which was sweat equity, the first one that I was doing. I met these guys in New York. I was, again, like just trying to understand the industry, talking to a lot of angel investors and some VCs. First New York, Miami was, again, there was nothing going on. I would go to these meetups, but there was no real angel investor. Every angel investor in Miami was a real estate investor, so it's just like the same. So I met these guys in New York called Spin Coffee, a hardware company. They're Dutch, and I was like, okay, if you want to have exposure to money in US, like to VCs, I can try to learn through you. So I'll pitch to a few VCs, and you guys stay in Amsterdam, and if anything happens, then we see, and I'll get my equity. And they're like, sure. So I pitched to a few VCs, like through LinkedIn, just like connecting. And then I connected with Highway 1, PCH, Liam Casey. So Liam was really nice. I was like, hey, sure, we have this hardware accelerator. Just stop by, talk to my team.
Yeah.
And then I came. That was my first trip. I came here, met his team. He loved. And then he did the first check for Spin Coffee. And they were accelerated, incubated by Highway 1. And then the guys moved here. So when the Spin Coffee guys moved here, I started coming more often. And then also Shervin Pishavar. He was also one of my first friends in town. Like Liam was the first, Shervin was the second. And Shervin, I was messaging him on LinkedIn for months.
Pretty famous venture capitalist, Shervin is.
Yeah, he is, especially after all that happened. But I'm always on his side. Like, he was super open and very supportive. Yeah. And he told me, first trip was Thanksgiving. And I was not I was not in tune with the American holiday, so I didn't even know. Right. So I was just here. It's like, oh, it's Thanksgiving. Come meet my family. After 2 meetings that we did that week, and met his entire family, met a lot of his portfolio companies, and that's why probably I fell in love with Silicon Valley. He was so welcoming, and everyone was so excited. I was like, wow. At the time, they were founding Hyperloop. So the guys from Hyperloop was just brainstorming at the living room. There was so much going on. I was like, wow, if this is Silicon Valley, I want to be here. And he told me one thing that I'll never forget. It's like, hey, I don't know exactly what you want to do here, but it will be very challenging for you. And I was like, why? It's like, it is challenging for me. You are an immigrant and you are not a standard. So if you want to achieve something here, go focus, study, and then you show up. Because if you just show up here, you'll not achieve anything. Right. It will be tough. I was like, okay, I'll get that. And then it was also after I started coming, I don't know if I told you this before, but as I started having my first meetings here, I got obsessed. I said, okay, to learn, I'll do my fund of funds. And then I wanted to do this fund of funds. And I started meeting with a bunch of VCs. And every single meeting, when I would explain, I have all these wealthy clients from Brazil, and they're not interested in investing in VC yet, but I want to bring them. And they're like, oh, sure, but it sounds corrupt. And I was like, what?
Why? Just because
Why?
South America?
Because that was exactly what they would say. And then I liked them because they were very transparent. I was like, it's a big continent, and you cannot just say that. And no, it just sounds corrupt. I don't mean to offend you, but it does. I was like, wow, you're offending me. But of course, I'm feeling offended. You don't know much about the countries over there, but you know enough to have your own judgment, right?
But of course, you're taking money from China, Saudi Arabia.
Yes. But yeah, it was sad, but it was fine. And you need to see the good thing. People in Brazil, they would never say that if you're thinking that, they would be so polite. So that's what I appreciated. Wow, they're really saying that. They don't care. And these days, the ones that I kept in touch, they always say, I'm so sorry, I didn't really mean it. I just didn't know. I was like, yeah, sure, thanks. But so that was a good lesson from Shervin day one, and that I could see along the way as I was coming here more often. And then I invested, and then started doing a few SPVs with Shervin as well. And then mainly the most important one was Q, which was a biotech company. And that's why I got to biotech. Of course, my parents are doctors, my siblings, so I was raised in that ecosystem, right? Just talking about health all the time and diseases at the same time. So I always wanted to find ways of managing health instead of just treating diseases. And then with biotech, I was like, okay, let me study this industry. Let me see what's happening on the VC world. And that's how I got to structure there's not a lot of pre-seed funds in consumer biotech and biotech. What if I did that? And then as I started talking to the VCs here and the incubators like IndieBio, Hawk Health, UMANA, everyone was very supportive. They're like, yeah, sure, we need deal flow. So if you need help with due diligence, we're happy to support you. So just do it. If you can raise money, that's what they always say. If you can do it, fine. Just let's see. And then as things were putting together, they're like, okay, you did it. Now you...
So you're in the pretty sexist real estate industry. You find the other big sexist industry, which is venture capital. How did you find that? Was it just meeting white dudes all day long, pretty much, or?
Yes, I think it's a way less sexist than real estate. I can say that. Yeah, I think people do not expect, and I think it's less. I don't know. I think it's less challenging than people also would imagine. At least for me, I think Or I was even talking to one of my founders today. She's also a woman. She's Black. And she was saying, oh, there's so many barriers that people keep repeating that to us, that if we really believe, I think we start just showing up to the meetings thinking we are less, and that becomes a problem. And I think the same I see on her was that for me, I got here so unaware that all those things that were happening, I can see looking back, like the issues, like the things that people were thinking, but when I was doing it, I was not seeing it. I was so driven that I wanted to do that, and just like taking those meetings and enjoying, because I love learning. So even like all these white dudes, that's this way, like they were so nice. I was like, how do I structure? Like people would never do that for me in Brazil. Like making time to tell me like, hey, you do 40% first time, 60% follow on. You put this in. Never. Oh, this is the way. These are the law firms you should use. This is the attorney I will introduce you to. Like, never. That never happened in my life before. So, like, the type of help I had here, it's unseen. And I don't know. People talk a lot of shit about Silicon Valley, but try to go anywhere else and see if people would help you the way they help you here. I don't think so.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's funny. And people talk about how hard it is to be venture capital. It's one of the funniest things I see is people complaining about how hard the job is on Twitter. But you came at it not from, well, I went to Stanford and then I worked at Goldman Sachs, which is like a lovely job. They pay you a bunch of money, but from actually like getting out there and figuring out how to raise money for low-income housing in Brazil, for like real estate in Miami. You probably shut up and you're like, okay, like I know what this is. This is raising money for investing in something. Yes,
that's pretty much it. And I thought would be, so as I was raising, was my first direct fund, right, in venture. It's like real estate is very tangible. And I was quite scared by not achieving much with the fund, like the first fund, because people talk a lot, like, oh, it's so challenging, it's so hard, blah, blah. And then I come here, I raise the fund, and then I'm able to partner up with great people, and then amazing advisors, like investment committee is great, deal flow is insanely good, and founders are also good. It's just like, what is challenging? And now it's like, it's just like so much fun. Like people are amazing. The structure is also, people don't know how hard it is. Legal structures in other countries, here is so fair to the investors. Like everything is black and white. Like there's nothing I should be afraid of. Like even like fund administration, like statements, like it's all ready for you, like, wow.
Right.
I was scared because I thought it would be so challenging and that people were just like, oh, go for it. But as I went for it and started like really managing, deploying, hiring, meeting the real people here, it's like, oh yeah, I can totally do that.
Did it ever occur to you how kind of ridiculous it is to just start a venture fund? I mean, because most people in their 20s try to get a job at a big venture firm, try to get some operating. Well, you obviously had your real operating experience, but like for someone to go, oh, I'm just going to start it. It's like a kind of an incredible leap of faith. If you think about it.
So, I remember Greg from Anorak, another VC, was one of my first friends here too. And he said, when I was, I think I'll do a fund one day, he said, why don't you do it now? I was like, what?
Okay.
And I was like, yeah, you just, you do a fund. I was like, no, you don't do a fund. Like, what are you talking about?
Right.
And I was like, no, because I don't know what you think it's a fund. And in Brazil, like minimum, okay, you do like $10 million, so you make it sustainable, because only on fees with CV, which SEC from here, like CVM for Brazil, like you spend so much money on structuring and being registered and so on, that doesn't make any sense to do like a small fund.
Right.
But here, because you can do these private funds, like less than 100 million, like not a lot of rules, and like you can manage on your own way, use the service providers that, because everything is venture backed, you can do things like with very little amount of money, Yeah. So when he said, I was like, no, it doesn't make sense. But as he shared me some PPMs and LPAs, I read, and then I saw like also like the proposals from these attorneys. I was like, yeah, you can do a fund. That was when I got really motivated. Also, I had the push from Trump when Trump was elected.
Oh yeah.
And I was, I forgot to say that, because
you've got to be like his least favorite person, like a successful woman, immigrant.
Wait, watch and see.
Yeah.
But I moved here in October 16.
Oh boy.
Was September 16. And then October all happened, and I was like, I was so frustrated. Like I didn't believe,
Sorry about that,
I was like, wow, this didn't happen. And I was really crying, and I never cried because of politics, everything is kind of manageable. But that,
it's a little rough.
like I moved to this country because I love it. It's like my nation. I like Brazil, but like US is like a dream for me. And I was so happy. And then him being elected, wow, it just was so disturbing to me, because like what people are thinking, like why they would elect someone like him, what they think about me. Because if I'm a woman, if I'm a Latina, if I'm an immigrant, if I'm all that stuff, and people think it's fine what he's saying, maybe people will not like me,
Yeah.
And even like in the airport, like the first month after he was elected, you would see people looking at you differently, myself, right? Like I would be walking like, wow, this is different. But I got over it, and people got over it, and everything went fine. But that was like, we didn't have any funds in Silicon Valley managed or led, like founded and led by a Latina. So I wanted to change the data. I was like, okay, that's a good use of my time.
True? That's true, isn't it? Wow.
Well, you have now like partners and you have other stuff, but that you had a solo GP and a founder, I was the first one.
Wow.
So, yeah.
So how do you, yeah, sorry about the Trump thing. I don't know, like we tried, but, so you're here in San Francisco. The real estate thing's gone now. You're not going to do that anymore. The venture capital thing has gotten you.
Yeah, I'm 100% focused, but I kept the company Vast House. I still have in Miami. I had partners. They're more senior partners, and I'm still a deal flow generator. Not deal flow generator, but investor generator, because I have all these people that tend to trust me by now, and then I just send to them. So I don't do anything, but I'm still a partner there. And then I fully focus in venture. But yeah.
And how did you start? So you pick biotech, which is kind of unusual. So because it used to be biotech was like you need hundreds of millions of dollars, and it takes 5 years, and then it's a drug that like reduces your risk of something by 1%.
Yeah.
But you saw something different, and some of your investments have been more in alternate foods and things that aren't just the classic biotech.
I'm very thankful to Liam again, because I was about to do a fund that would invest only in immigrants. So I had that thing with Trump. So like, okay, I invest in immigrants. Like more than half of the unicorns were funded by immigrants. Blah, blah. I had all that data at the time. And then Liam came to me, and he's also an immigrant. He's like, no, do not do that.
Yeah.
I was like, and I was so excited. I was in love about my thesis. I was like, why? And he was, why would you do that? You are an immigrant. Like, of course, you have a deal flow from that, but you don't need to just put yourself in a box that you limit yourself forever. Yeah. And I really couldn't see at the time. I was like, no, you don't understand. And then I tried to be the victim, like, it's hard, Yeah. I'm here, I'm blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, it's not. And you can totally do it. Just go for it. Yeah. I was like, fuck. I was like for 1 week thinking, and I already had a team. And then I showed up to the team. I was like, hey, I'm changing the entire thesis. We'll do something else. And they're like, what is something else? And I was like, healthtech. Was not biotech right away. I was like, healthtech. And they're like, okay, why? And like, because there's a story. Like there's Q. I was analyzing a company called Curology at the time. I didn't invest, but I was thinking about doing the SPV with Sherving. I was like, there's just something there. Of course, my parents, blah, blah. They're like, we don't buy it. So like none of them supported me. I was like, okay, I'll do better. So I went to meet with all these investors in the industry, and they were nice. So I think when you find your people, it's easier, because I did the same for fintech, but fintech was crowded and they were not so cool. Like biotech, they were in need. And that need that they had motivated me to do. I was like, okay, do I really have your support? Like, where are your deals coming from? It's just like randomly, like when they're already like Series B, what happens like between seed to Series A, and then the bridge until B, like there's not much going on. So you can go and try. So because I had that support, and then Ryan, who you interviewed and became my partner, Ryan at IndieBio, he is a storyteller. And I'll never forget the first time I went to IndieBio to ask him to be my advisor. And he was just like telling me all these things about biotech. We would, after the first time we met, like we started meeting, I don't know, probably 3 times a week, and like watching Black Mirror and sci-fi and longevity TED Talks. Like he drove me crazy. I was like, oh my God, I love this. That's what I want to do. But it was because of him, like pretty much. And the others, like Illumina, like Mustafa, all these people, they were super, Matt Castle, Tom, like everyone was very supportive. And I was like, okay, they are opening my eyes to something that I should be.
And Ryan Bethencourt is the guy who founded Wild Earth, which you eventually invested in, right?
Yes.
And which eventually won money from Mark Cuban on whatever the heck that TV show is.
Shark Tank.
Shark Tank. And I think it's doing really well.
Yes, he got no one would believe on his vegan dog food at the beginning.
Yeah.
His deck was weird, he's a scientist, very entrepreneurial, but he knew it and he's killing it. He raised, 15 million by now. And Peter Thiel, all those big names are now in. So he's doing a good job and he's becoming a great CEO because he was always a very entrepreneurial guy, but the past 18 months that I've been seeing his development, it's mind blowing.
Yeah. Wow. That's such a great story. So how do you, while you're doing all this investing, decide to start, I guess, what should be your third fund, a crypto fund or blockchain, I should say.
That's the third. So the blockchain fund happened very fast. What happened was it's Silicon Valley, so everyone is talking about these things like AI, blockchain, blah, blah, blah. And I just launched a biotech fund and I was investing in crypto. So I started investing in crypto only January 17. And the biotech fund got up and running September 17. So by before August 17. And then in August, I met a bunch of people in crypto because Babel was operating. We had a team. Ryan was in. Ron was also in, our technical team at the biotech fund. And I was like, okay, what if blockchain affects our performance? What if it takes over healthcare and so on? So I was just studying and throwing ideas to Ryan and Ron, and they're like, yeah, sure, we don't care. So I was like, okay, my biotech people are not listening to me. Let's find some crypto people. Right. And then I started meeting a bunch of all this Brian from Coinbase, Ryan that was at the time at Polychain, and then Jeremy, and they were not excited about anything that blockchain would do for the healthcare or even new solutions for longevity and these consortiums that I was seeing. They're like, no, you don't need to care about any of this. Will not be any issue for Babel, but you should be aware of crypto anyway, and you should be investing. And as everyone that starts studying blockchain, you just get a little excited and then you get super excited and then you cannot leave the room. You just want to read and absorb everything that is around you. So I was doing that. And then I met Jeremy, who is my co-founder at Ausum. And Jeremy, at the first meeting he came, he has a magazine distributed, and then he gave me the magazine. He's like, oh, you know very little, go study. And after you know a little bit more, we can talk. Right. And then he went, that was July. So it was before the fund was closed. So he went to Europe, summer, Ibiza, all that stuff. And then he came back and I read everything I could. Yeah. Andreessen has an amazing website with all those articles too. So I got up to speed and I was so excited. And I was like, okay, I get it. And I think we should do something out of this. And he was like, what do you mean? And of course, I got excited about the ICOs and the decentralization and the power of people, and all these investors that couldn't invest I was before. So wow, we can do so much. We should just raise a fund, but an ICO and blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, shut up. That doesn't make any sense. Everyone is doing that. This is for shady people, shady people, blah, blah. I was like, oh, okay. So, okay, let it go. Nothing.
Did South America have anything to do with it? I worked with a guy from Venezuela, and he just understood crypto way before he's like, no, you don't get it. It totally, and we're all like, I don't know, dollars work pretty well. And he's like, yeah, our thing doesn't work pretty well.
That's for sure. When you start learning about stable coins and you coming from a country that has inflation, of course, Brazil was not as bad as Venezuela. That's insane, or Argentina, but we had worse times. I was still a kid that I don't remember pretty well, when I had these insane levels of inflation, but we still have, when I started buying dollars, it was 1 for 174. Now it's 1 for 420, 460, depending. So it's insane. So it's still crazy, and so that level of instability, and then studying crypto, of course, I think it's a way easier for people from developing countries who suffered from inflation to quickly see it, And then the same, with all this remittance play, of course, everyone here is sending money to our countries, to help them out. It's not my case. My parents are fine, but a lot of people here. So you get it quickly, and you understand that, 10%, 7% of a remittance, it's a lot, which people think, what do you mean? $7 of 100? $100 for people is a lot. So
that's a big percent.
They don't see it the same way because they really don't understand the power of that type of capital. But Jeremy later after a month pitching him these ideas and like the power of blockchain as a tool for social change, he was, okay, I agree with you. I think we can do something there. If it's an impact investing fund, I'm down to do it. And I was like, okay, so let's do a hybrid, because he always believed on the token side. And I'm a VC in the end of the day. It's like, no, I think we'll have a big wins if we start investing equity in venture deals instead of only doing the pre-ICO stuff. And he was like, okay, so let's go with this thesis. And then we raised, went pretty well, was doing okay. Of course, the market is okay, but I think comparing, like, we're doing great.
Yeah. And so there's a third fund, and then I'll ask you about a couple specific things. You have to get through so many funds. And so that now you've started a wealth management company as well.
Yes.
You really need to stop after this. Otherwise, the podcast will be too long. So you start another fund, which is doing wealth management. Mm-hmm. So what was wrong with wealth management before you came along? Like, what's the problem?
So
I assume you didn't just start it because you thought it was working. So what's the problem with wealth management?
What I understood, it started because of the crypto people first. Mm-hmm. They were asking me how to be compliant and how to structure their taxes and blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, people don't understand money here. Like, they don't understand the structures. That's so weird because you're so wealthy. And then what I realized was not just about taxes and compliance, was also about caring. Like, you are so wealthy and you're not creating foundations, you are not doing anything that you really care, probably because you just don't have the time, right? Mm-hmm. So UMANA started because of that. Like, okay, how can we be human driven and not like the Silicon Valley approach of, oh, let's care. Like, we all try to care here, but it's very hard because we are busy. So I was like, okay, how can we make sure we will care and that people believe that we're just not another wealth manager pitching a fund, like an idea. So what I did was like, okay, let's take out the fees, because self-mades, they don't care if you were hustling on their side, but they care if you're getting a piece of it and not seeing much results on the short term, right? Yeah. So like, okay, let's take the fees out, and then we align in terms of goals. Like, if you believe this thesis works for you and can be donation or can be like more returns, I believe in wealth creation, align with wealth redefinition. So like, okay, what does wealth mean to you? And then after I understand that, okay, let's create something based on that, like your legacy, the purpose that really drives you, because maybe you'll be focused in this company that you're building for the next 5 to 10 years, but on the side, we can be doing great. And one of the main motivators, we're also seeing like the prices, like the value of crypto going down in so many tokens. Mm-hmm. Like, those founders, they created so much wealth so quickly, and if they had done just like some ecosystem funds, like deployed it wisely or just donated, like that was real money. That suddenly was not anymore. So those type of things drives me crazy, because you can be focused, but I can be doing other things for you, and we'll be creating change in a lot of countries, in a lot of places. So that was my main motivation. And then UMANA is a multi-family office that charges 0 fees. The whole thing, we work as a VC in the sense of selecting the clients. Like, we have an investment committee, we have psychologists on the board. So choose these self-mades, and goes from athletes to celebrities to tech people. We need to see the care, and they are willing to show they care, and that they will be transforming the things the way they are.
Right. So what do you make of Silicon Valley culture coming from Brazil? We were talking about Burning Man, which I make fun of, not really seriously because I never went, but...
You will.
Have you been?
Yes, of course.
And?
I love it. I think, okay, coming from Brazil, my first assumption when all these people talk about Burning Man was that Americans are cold and they don't know how to hug and they don't know how to be intense. So I was like, oh, poor Americans, they don't know how to be warm. So they go to Burning Man, take all these drugs, come back and start like this hugging thing. And I thought it was just silly. I was like, oh, they don't know anything about life. But as I started going, I understood that it was so much more. First, I think it's very personal. I think each of us has a different experience there. Yeah. And I'm warm, I'm Brazilian, like I have issues of maybe almost sexual harassing people when they come to the office because I always hug, right? And people, they do like ninja movements, like, no, like do not hug me. So
Right.
So Burning Man for me was not about being warm or hugging.
I don't
or
think you're
being
the
more...
problem in Silicon Valley, maybe a bit. I don't think so. So Silicon Valley is like a loving, happy experience for a lot of people.
It is.
We go
But-
and keep going.
No, but look, then for me, Burning Man, and then you also go about the whole thing about conscious lifestyle and sustainability, and then you were there and you're looking like, wow, we come here, we spend all this money, like why don't we just help people like in a meaningful way where people really need it? But the thing is, Burning Man has all these amazing people, powerful people, and random people, like just everything. You get everything over there. And you get a level of humanity and kindness that it just reshape you entirely. Like when you were there and you see this 1 week, 10 days of everyone being nice to each other, that everything works, that no one wants anything from you. No one knows who you are, what you do. It's all about being yourself, but for real. Yeah. I know that a lot of people go to Burning Man to do business, but that was not my case in any of the times I've been there. And it was just like, wow, this exists. And then you come back willing to do more for the humanity. It's not about you anymore. It's about, and of course you forget. That's why it needs to be every year. Yeah. Because you get lost, you know, there's a lot of things going on. If you don't go and then don't feel it again, you can just miss the whole thing.
Now I feel bad for making fun of it. Not too bad, though.
You see,
it's just fun.
It's about kindness.
All right. So a couple of things that you do that I think are interesting that I wanted to just ask you about. What do you, like, the future of food? Like I didn't think about it much, but the rate at which it's changing. After talking to Ryan, he was like, look, animals are omnivores, and you'd probably rather not some huge amount of animals get killed to feed other animals.
Yes.
So even if you don't care about the health, you don't care about what's in your pet food or whatever, all else being equal, you just don't kill the animals and your pet's still fine. Like, okay, like I'm not a vegan or anything like that, but I buy that. And it seems like that's happening quickly, both in the animal world and in the real, like there's Impossible Burgers and Beyond Burgers. And
it's happening super fast. And I think it's a global trend by now. Even, I'm from south of Brazil, we have the famous barbecues. Like every person in south eats meat insanely. And as the first time I would present like Impossible Foods or Beyond Meats and these companies to Brazilians from south here, like they were like, oh no. And then they would eat and like, oh, okay, that could work, but we'll never replace. But now you go to Brazil, you have some new companies doing exactly the same, and people are following. And the new generation, especially, they really don't care about the meat anymore. You know, like you care about first being conscious. I think that counts a lot, and understanding that if it tastes good, and especially if you adapt your taste for things that we're not where you used to eat, and you don't even start eating that, like the traditional meat and fish, you get used very quickly to this new trend. And I think we'll see this in the next 5 years taking over in an insane way. And it's really good for everyone.
For me, the big switch was like you'd have bean burgers and tofu burgers that were delicious, but you're like, it's not a hamburger. It just wasn't. The Impossible Burgers, though, or whatever, I forget which brand it is, that I've had, though, are like, I can't tell the difference. So
they're really good. Today I ordered Impossible Beef, like a bowl with Impossible Beef, and everyone ate. No one knew. I was like, it's so funny. Like no one knows anymore because it's so tasty.
And don't you have a company that's doing the fish side of things too?
Finless Foods. Yes, that's lab grown fish.
That's a big one
too. The first one. Yes, I think. We have also like mission barns for pork and duck. Like we have a lot of things happening, and I think Ryan also did Shiok, the shrimp company. Oh, yeah. So I think we'll see happening in every single layer of the clean meat industry. And I think it's just inevitable. Like the beginning, you get some of the vegans, a lot of like the new generation that cares more about conscious consumption. And then when you see everyone else is like cannabis, you know, we also do a lot of cannabis. I see like now my parents like asking, oh, can you buy cannabis tea for us? Can you buy like CBD tea? Like, yeah, sure. So it switched so quickly, and they were so against like 2 years ago, you know?
So beyond cannabis, Psychedelics. Like, what is this as an investment? Because Ryan brought it up to me. I hadn't even thought about it. But I guess it makes sense if you think about drugs that don't really seem to harm people.
Yes.
But are really illegal. Like, what of psychedelics? I
think it's another huge thing for us to be with our eyes wide open. It's a solution. Like, I had migraines for my entire life, right? And like, not my entire life, but since I became an entrepreneur, so like for 15 years at least. And then finally I tried a treatment with mushrooms, like a guided treatment with mushrooms with a coach, and they were gone. But people who have migraines know how you suffer with that. And for an entrepreneurial and workaholic like I am, sometimes it's like an entire day that you cannot touch your phone because you start crying, the head hurts so much, like you cannot do anything. And then suddenly you do a psychedelic treatment that I would never guess or bet that would work. I have tried everything, like the most weirdest stuff, but all like more like traditional, right? And then suddenly like, let's try mushrooms for my migraines. And boom, they were gone. I think that's just like a small sample of what we can do. And I think the fact that we can access our unconscious mind and really maybe reconnect the wires there in a different way is just insane. Like, how come? Like, we know so little about our brains and about our mental health that I think all the things we'll see happening with the psychedelic industry, it's huge.
A little more exciting than real estate.
Yes.
Well, so I'll finish up and ask you a couple. Are there like books that you read now that inspire you that you would recommend that people read? Are there like people that inspire you now that motivate you and you seem so excited about the future? Like what is driving it for you now?
I think, of course, we call family members our clients at UMANA, and the family members are super exciting for me because you need to care about them on another level. Like, I always say it's a family by choice. So you need to love them. Like, you go through a lot of things with these people. It's almost being like a talent manager for the celebrities and so on. It's like, it's really nice. It gives me a lot of energy. And then the founders, I'm always reading. I read a lot. Like, I can say a few books here, but the founders, they give me a lot of energy. I think when I'm drained and then suddenly I have a pitch meeting with a great founder or just like a catch-up meeting with one of my portfolio companies, I get all my energy back. It's like, okay, that's why I'm doing this. Yeah. That's why we need this. And
that's
then
funny.
it just keeps going.
I just interviewed Maha Ibrahim, who's the Egyptian partner at Canaan. And she said that. She's like, I get a little burnt out after. And she's been doing it for however many, 20 years or something. And she's like, exactly that. But then
it's
somebody
crazy.
Walks in and I'm like, this is great.
Back. Yeah, because a few days are exhausting and you keep wondering, like, am I in the right path? But it's just that. It's like that small dose of entrepreneurs in front of you and like, okay, it means a lot.
What are a couple of the books you like?
One of my favorites, Principles from Ray Dalio. That was a very important book for me. I love Ryan Holiday with all his new way of putting philosophy. So like ego is the enemy. He's a stoicist, so I love what he says there. Robert Greene, which is his inspiration, I would say, right? Like I've been reading Robert Greene since I'm 13. So like 48 Laws of Power and then Laws of Human Nature, I think that's the latest, and Mastery, Art of Seduction, all those books.
Those are great books.
It's about, I love that. I really like.
The original Laws of Power, I don't know if you ever had the original book. It was really cool because it was it was designed, so it was in color. So it would be like, there'd be a gray, like, because he'll say like a law, like, do this. Then he'll show you like how Shakespeare talked about it and how Machiavelli.
Yes. Well, it was in Portuguese, but I think it's exactly that book that I have. Yes.
Yeah, that was the one. But then there was a version where it was just cool. Like the page would be laid out a certain way. And then the quote from like the historian would be in red.
That's exactly it. Because I think, imagine I was 14 years old when I read his book for the first time. And it was so intriguing for me, the whole way it was designed. I was like, wow, this is cool. And it was so Machiavellic.
Incredible. All right, well, this has been great. You're not going to start another company in the next year, are you? We've got 4 investment companies. I think it's enough.
I think UMANA will keep me busy. I think a lot of companies will come through UMANA.
All right. Well, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. My guest has been Ba Minuzzi. This is the Something Venture podcast. Talk to you next time.